Hello everyone, this is Mohammed from Python Ninja YouTube channel, and today we will learn together default arguments of functions in Python. A default argument or arguments are defined as a default value for a certain function parameters or temporary variables. Okay, so from now and on we will call the temporary variables as parameters, and we will assign default arguments or positional arguments just to better distinguish for the beginners. Okay, the default value is used when the argument is deleted or omitted. Okay, in case we call the function or when we revoke the function. Okay, so sometimes we invoke or recall the function, and we for example we forget or we omit like inserting or submitting the arguments, so we need to assign the default value for these arguments. Another advantage when we use default arguments lies in reducing the number of arguments when we recall the function. So let's practice this by example to see what I mean of default arguments. So if I will define a function that will return to me the net price after both discount and tax, so I can say this, for example, net price. You can name the function as what you want, and so here we will have cumulative price. Okay, and we will have also the discount, and we will have tax. Okay, these are parameters. These are in this form called positional because they don't have any default value. Okay, now we want to return from this function this cumulative price. Okay, and this will be multiplied by 1 minus the discount ratio. Okay, and multiply by 1 plus the tax ratio. By this expression we can return any net price. So we will have the original price or the gross, and we will multiply, not add, we have to multiply this by 1 minus the discount ratio. If we have, for example, 20% discount, then we multiply the price by 80% to have the net price. Then we will also multiply it with the additive tax. Okay, so we can print this in this form to see how the results looks like. So I want to recall the function, and inside this function I have to add any random number, for example. Okay, then I want to add the discount ratio. This discount ratio can be, for example, 0.08. Okay, and I want to add the tax ratio, and the tax ratio will be, for example, 0.117. And here I want to also consider two floating points. Okay, and the print. Okay, so I have this function recalled here. I have the cumulative price here, then I have the discount ratio here. So 1 minus this is the discount that I will have. Okay, multiplied by the cumulative price, and I will have also the additive tax to that price. So let us run this line, and we will have now the cumulative price after adding the discount, after the discount, and after like adding the tax will be like greater. So we can play around, for example, this tax ratio, the discount ratio, and we can reduce the number. This is nothing but a simulation or like example of how can we define a function that will return the net price for me. So the function in this form contains the parameters in a form of positional arguments. So I have here the positional arguments, okay, and I assign the value of the corresponding parameters. Now we can define the default arguments, meaning that this value can be assigned by default when I design the function. For example, I can identify default value for discount to be 0.20, and I can give also default value for the tax to be, for example, 0.17. Okay, let us use sign here. Okay, and I can like omit them. I can delete them when I recall the function. Okay, so let us run this line of code and we will have the same result. However, when I recall the function, which is the net price, I only submitted inside the function the cumulative price, okay? And I didn't send the discount and tax, and in this case, it will take the default value, okay, which is 20 and 17 in this case. And these are called default arguments, which have the values by default. But I can change these values or these numbers. For example, I can change them. For example, if I want to change only discount, I can update the value of the discount just by modifying it when I recall the function, and we will see here the number is reduced because the discount is increased. Okay, so in general, let us agree about the terminology. We have a positional argument, which are the parameters or the instant variables that identified in the function without any default value. It is identified in this form. And we have default arguments, which are defined in the same way, okay, but it has a default value. So we identify a value at the time when we build our function. So we have two positional and default arguments. It is also important to remember this rule. We start by identifying positional arguments first, then the default argument. So the default argument must follow the positional argument. What does that mean? I cannot move this positional argument that doesn't have any default value in this case, because this positional argument, which are the argument that does not contain any default value, must be identified at the beginning, okay? And the default argument should be follow this. If I want to run this, I will have error which say that non-default arguments, which is this one, follows default arguments, okay? So I have to make this at the beginning, okay? Or all positional arguments should be stacked at the beginning and all default arguments should be stacked at the end. Let's us practice another example here. I want to design a counter, use time module, for example, import time, okay, and so the import time, and I want to design a counter function, so I can define the counter, okay, for example, step. I want to turn it as counter step. What I want to define this, I want to define, or I want to identify start as a positional argument and end as a default argument. Again, default argument because it has a default values in this form, okay? We assign a value for this argument. Now I want to loop for I in range. I want to start from the start. I want to finish at the end plus 1. Why end plus 1? Because this 15 will not be included, okay, in the range. So usually we have the end minus 1, but we add this one because we want to enforce the indexing in Python to stop at 15. So indexing in Python starts at 0 till 14 here, and we want to reach the limit of 15. And then I want to print I. After printing this I want to make a sleep function. Sleep function will take a pause of the execution, okay, and then I want to, for example, print, for example, the counter limit, the counter reach, for example, its limit, okay. By this case, we design our own counter function. I can revoke this function or recall this function. I can send the starting point to be 0, and the default one, I have the choice either to insert it or to omit it. So I will not insert it now, so we can see the counter like increase 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 till reaching the 15, and finally it will be it will print this line, and I can make it more fancy. For example, I can do like count down, not from 0, 1, but it starts from 15 when I use reverse. We learn together reverse in for loop, okay. Reverse will take the step to go from the top to the bottom, okay, and you can play around. This is like sleep, for example. You can increase the time to pause the function, and we can also identify another starting value. Instead of 0, I want to start it from 5, and we will see that the code execution will stop at 5, and at 5 it will reach to the limit. And remember again, we can also identify the default value. The default value is identified by modifying this at, for example, recall or invoking time. So now I change this 15 to 20, and when I start running the code, it will start from 20, not from 15. Remember again and again, we have two types so far of arguments. We have the positional arguments, which are the parameters that are identified, okay, in a function, and when we define the function, but we don't assign any default value like this. And we have the default argument, which are the arguments that has been or that has been associated or assigned with default values. And when we design the function, the positional arguments should be at the beginning, and the default arguments should be identified after identifying this positional argument. And in the next tutorial, we will highlight the keyword arguments. So we will study the keyword argument, and we have to remember that we have the positional argument, we have default arguments. We will highlight in the next tutorial the keyword arguments, and later in a separate tutorial we will also highlight the arbitrary arguments. Today we have 4 classes of arguments, and these are mandatory when we deal with function to distinguish between them. Thank you very much.